Welcome to the Friday edition of the Power Hour. This is Dave.
And Joyce.
And we are very happy to have joining us for a return engagement a gentleman who has made a major contribution, not just to this country, but the entire world, with his most controversial film, Zeitgeist. And I say that because it is controversial. It has created a, shall I say, ripple effect around the world, and there are worldwide screenings going on of Zeitgeist. It's been translated into I have no idea how many languages, and I'm thrilled to have joining us Mr. Peter Joseph, producer of Zeitgeist and the new Zeitgeist Addendum. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Welcome back, Peter.
Oh, thank you, David. I appreciate that. It's good to be back.
Oh, I'm thrilled and honored to have you joining us again. Before we get into the new film, Zeitgeist Addendum, I was hoping that you might give the listeners a little bit of a background. Now, you've been doing films for quite some time. What were you doing before Zeitgeist happened?
Commercial work, primarily, and really small-time commercial work in New York City. People often ask me why I don't talk about my history more. It's mainly because my history is very unimpressive. You know, when I got out of high school, I moved to New York many years ago to go to music school, actually. And to be a music performer is very difficult in New York City. So even though I attempted to do that for a little while, being a composer and a musician, it was very difficult to make ends meet. So I started moving into film. I found there was interesting connections between music composition and film editing as far as phrasing and things like that. So essentially I started doing that. I was never classically trained in any capacity. I just picked it up, and I started getting work doing different commercial freelance editing in New York City. And basically that's what I've been doing ever since, and that's essentially the majority of it. The projects, I've never made another documentary. The first documentaries I ever made, or the first feature-length films I ever made, were Zeitgeist and Zeitgeist Addendum. So those were my little babies, I suppose.
Well, for a first effort, you certainly did hit one out of the park. You hit numerous ones out of the park. Now, what was it? What gave you the impetus or the motivation to do Zeitgeist? Well, what was it? You didn't just know all this stuff. Where did you get your information? What gave you the kick in the butt to get you rolling on this?
Honestly, I've always tracked different points in regards to the issues presented through time. Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by religion. I was raised religious for a little while, and it became more of just like an interest of mine to see this incredible amalgam of information that people believe. And I just thought about it, and it was always a part of me ever since I was a little kid. Ever since I was exposed to it to begin with, I had this immense curiosity. So that's one side of it. But the real trigger was 9/11, because I started looking at the power structures, and I always had obviously, if you're paying any attention in the United States or the world, you see there's some massive problems with all governments everywhere. And what I came to find was, when 9/11 came around, I was like, this is just way too much. And I was terrified of the political ramifications the moment it happened, because of how immense and how much it favored the power structures. And then when I began to realize the fraud inherent in the actual action, I was blown back. I was like, I have to do something. Now, one thing that many people don't understand about the original Zeitgeist is it was actually a performance piece, so to speak. It was shown in Lower Manhattan for an event that was put on for free, public awareness event, and it was shown, which is why the thing has a lot of experiential elements with music and big interludes and graphic things like that, because it's less of it's not a typical documentary by any means, and it's very structured. And that's how it originally came to be. But that came about a few years after 9/11. And that was the big trigger, honestly. 9/11 was one of those things where it made me step up and say, I'm going to do something to create public awareness. And then I thought about it in a larger form. I thought about, the criminal elite, which has become more and more transparent, that, uses the financial system as its primary tool. And then I started thinking about establishments in general, and it started to relate back to religion and these power structures that have been around. In religion, religion used to be big government in Europe. Now it's big government in the Middle East. So there's a big connect there as far as the establishment power structures. And 9/11 was a big trigger for me to actually just be motivated to step up. And I think for many people out there, 9/11 has woken tons of people up into
absolutely.
So they got away with a lot with that, but they don't realize what they triggered. For every big power play that a government does, they open up a lot of minds. So I think a lot of these guys are kicking themselves, because there's a lot of people that know what's going on in multiple countries. Japan, Russia, I mean, I was invited to do a television show in Moscow all about 9/11 truth, and I was amazed that they're willing to do this on a major television network in Moscow because, you know, the power structures really want to understand this. Because there's corruption rampantly in all power structures. I want to make that very clear. The United States isn't just some hidden villain. They just happen to be the empire of the moment with their corporate structure. But this has been going on forever and ever and ever. And I think certain countries that have been abused by these financial policies instigated by the West are starting to come forward and say, we're not going to tolerate this anymore, which is why in the new film I have John Perkins, who's the economic hitman, discuss his business in regards to manipulation of other countries, but we can get into that a little bit later. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, that's a major part of the new film Addendum is the interview that you had with Mr. Perkins.
Right.
But the simple fact, in just in this short period of time, you've hit upon the major institutions. Okay, you've hit upon religion. You've hit upon, of course, the 9/11 issue has to do with shall we say, the bolstering of the military-industrial complex, which gives government more power. And of course, they finance this entire thing through the use of the same type of controlled banking system that we've had. And those are the three different parts of the first film, Zeitgeist. Now, I want to back up just a little bit because obviously, the first part of the film was focusing in on religion itself. Now, a lot of folks were offended by that. And, and to them I would say, this is not to slam God. It was not to slam God. I mean, I believe in God, and I'm sure you do too. I got this very spiritual feeling from you, from our conversations, and also just the presentation. But it's the institution of organized religions that have apparently misled people, and no one is immune to this, including Christians. And yes, I don't agree with everything that's in the film, but a lot of the stuff that was brought to the table gives us all cause for thought. Now, when folks, you encourage people to make copies. Some people make copies of the Zeitgeist film, but they take out the first part. Do you feel that by taking out the first part, they're missing the point?
Of course, because by the end of the film, there's a summary section which basically encapsulates the whole thing. I don't remember what I stated verbatim, but the whole point is that there's a complex in the system where division is used to keep and maintain control. And I think religion has fallen victim to this by the human beings that have dominated these institutions. And essentially, if you remove the first part of the film, you're not seeing that. You're cutting off, one of the most important historical elements of the entire human species, which has been religious development, which is essentially our development of who we are. And when we get into that more specifically and look at the stories and see how they're essentially emergent culminations derived from many faiths, which I feel is very poetic. I don't feel it's insulting to say that, there are gross similarities between all religions and religions borrow from each other. I think that's beautiful because it shows that the human mind and the human society has actually blended things in a kind of a concert and unification. And unfortunately, though, it deviates because of the ego associated and the identity associated with these religions, where no one wants to believe. And excuse me, to say one more thing, that people want to be separated, so they don't want to see a relationship between each other in this sense, because they've been taught by the established institutions and religion that certain groups are right. This is the path to divinity. This is the path to your savior. And then other religions are wrong, and this is not the path. This is the false path. Islam right now is the biggest culprit of this. They're the ones that immediately reject all other religions. I go after Christianity. People will attack me because they say I'm anti-Christian, and that's not the case whatsoever. I'm not anti-anything. What I am is pro-human, and I guess I could say I'm anti-bias if I was to say that, and it's sort of a conundrum or a paradox, so to speak, if you think about it. But nevertheless, what I mean by that is if I was in a room with a Jew, a Muslim, and a Christian, I don't see three different people whatsoever. I see three human beings wearing essentially different clothes because religion is basically a taught culmination for the most part. Religion can't exist in its classical forms unless it's been communicated. So if I was born in the Middle East, odds are I'd be speaking Arabic because that would be my conditioning. If I was born into a Muslim family, odds are I'd be Muslim. These are the type of things that I'd like to address that are really important for people to step back and realize, because once you realize that your religious belief has at least 95% of it has been basically communicated to you, as opposed to you discovering it, which I think people do in their own way. There's always spiritual things we all discover within ourselves, and we make associations with different systems that have been presented to us, like religion. But it's still a conditioning type of reaction. And I think that that's something that people really miss when they think about their religion. They don't really see how, say, for example, their parents taught them all this, yet, they didn't give too much critical thought to it. And this goes back to things which I think your radio show's about, people thinking for themselves. So people really need to start evaluating what they've been taught and thinking for themselves. And back to what you were saying, yes, if you cut out the first part of this movie, I think you miss a great majority of it, especially because I relate to it by the end. So it makes it completely disjunct, both structurally and in its ideology.
Right. Well, we've got a break coming up here, and I want to make sure, I want to clarify when we come back, because I don't get the impression that you're a humanist, because, that's a whole different can of worms here.
I don't use any of those labels.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that's why I wanted to clarify that. I do find that you're very spiritual. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that you do believe in God. It's the issue about organized religion and the fact that we've all been misled, no matter what you think. We'll be back in 4 minutes with Peter Joseph. Stay with us. Our guest today, Peter Joseph, creator of the film Zeitgeist and the all-new Zeitgeist Addendum, spends a lot of time focusing on the Federal Reserve. Welcome back to the Power Hour. This is Dave and Joyce. And Peter, is there any... I mean, you spent so much time in the first film about the Federal Reserve and in the new film on the Federal Reserve. Is there any other issue right now that you think is more important than understanding what our monetary system is all about?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because, as I point out in the film, the monetary system is the lifeblood of everything in our societies and our world society. So this game that's been played for so long, I'd say going on about 300 years since the Bank of England instigated this fractional reserve system, has really run its course. And as I point out in the film, I think my exact word is it's a 100-year pyramid scheme coming to an end, and that's exactly what I believe is happening. We're talking about recession and depression now. We've had small recessions through time, but I think it's time for the big one because they need a massive shakeout in order to get rid of all of the excess liquidity that's been, exploited in all these different ways through the derivatives market, all these bubbles, through the housing market. They make more and more money, and it goes into different sectors, and then the sectors blow up. And right now, the banking system was that sector, and the inherent fraud of the fractional reserve system where there's not enough money in the system to cover what's needed in society, which is the most critical point. It's a scarcity in the money supply, which is extremely dangerous on multiple levels, not only structurally but psychologically, which we can go into in a little while as well. Mm-hmm. This is coming to fruition, and I think it's time people realize that the problem, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this, the problem is not bad loans or somebody who doesn't make enough money and they go and get a loan, a 40-year mortgage at ridiculous variable interest rates. It's not the practice of the institutions, the surface institutions. It's the underlying mechanism of the system, which has been instilled by the Federal Reserve, known as the fractional reserve policy. And that's the most critical point that people should think about when they start addressing the economic issues of the fractional reserve system.
I'm getting the impression, Peter, is that we are in a race against time right now because so many houses of cards are in the process of collapsing. People all around the country, all around the world are finding out about our fiat currency. The dollar has been the standard on the world economy for so many years, and this is on its way out. The house of cards, as far as the 9/11 fallacy, is on its way down. People are finding out. As a matter of fact, before you joined us, even Don Henley from the Eagles has done a song called 9/11 Was a Lie. I'm sorry. I had it queued up here. But anyway, the big rock stars are becoming aware of this.
Absolutely, yeah. No aren't afraid anymore.
So my concern here is that are these madmen going to throw us into a third world war? Because it seems that war always seems to be the solution to an economic collapse. Do you see an economic collapse, total, absolute collapse where inflation goes insane, hyperinflation, and then the result is a world war? Do you see this coming?
That's actually a great point. I was making that point to a friend of mine the other day. That is exactly what I think is possible. I'm not a prophet. I can't tell you what will happen. One thing I do recognize, though, is that the Fed has a lot of tricks up its sleeve, and what it's been doing is easing this as best it can. So it's been doing liquidity, the insertion of liquidity into the system on multiple levels, on scales much larger than what the press has been denoting, by the way. Mm-hmm. If you look at what other markets have been reporting in the international news as far as the central bank collusions happening, to offset the dollar and things like this, all these games that have been played, there's a lot of money that's being dumped in the world markets, and of course it's only temporary. And, once this thing hits the point of no return where putting new money into the system no longer has a result, which has basically been the case, that's when the tables are really going to shift. But I don't know what the Fed's going to do. I think invariably they're going to make a big shakeout. The moment, for example, I think when when Bernanke comes out and says, okay, we have to raise the interest rate now. I mean, how far can they go, to zero? Well, I think we're at 1% now. They might go down to 0.5%, and then they might hit zero. It wouldn't surprise me if they hit zero for a little while, as radical as that would be. But the moment they tick up is the moment that the real contraction will have to begin, and the shakeout will start. In 1929, they used the market as an excuse to do this, where they pulled out all the margin loans to take the market down. Now, of course, if anyone knows anything about the stock market, really, it might be considered a barometer for the U.S. economy, but it has no real relevance to our systems, economic systems whatsoever, a government, or corporation.
Okay, I hate to interrupt. We're going to the break. We'll be right back.
Dave?
Our guest this hour is Peter Joseph, producer of the film Zeitgeist and the all-new Zeitgeist Addendum. And, the song that we just played there is called The Road for Depression. It's shall we say, a parody of the old Hope Crosby song, The Road to, and fill in the blank. And we're talking about the salient points, and there's so many in the film. And I wanted to just change gears a little bit. One of the major power structures is based upon energy. Of course, we all know oil is is king right now. And even oil is on the ropes right now because new technologies are coming out. And, Peter, you spent a good amount of time in the new film, Zeitgeist Addendum, talking about something called the Venus Project. Tell listeners, if you will, what is the Venus Project?
Okay, well, essentially the Venus Project, which was begun by a man named Jacques Fresco, who's about 92 years of age now, a very, very unique and interesting mind. He has been working, I'd say he's been spent about 70 years, if not more, very specifically thinking about social design, thinking about society, examining, the basis of different established systems, why they exist, the ramifications of them, the negative implications, what are they really contributing, what is relevant, what is outdated, in a way that no one else that I've ever met has ever thought about these things. The Venus Project is essentially a philosophy based on the Earth and thinking about nature as a guiding force to the way we design and think about society, the way society should be oriented, the way people should think to a certain degree about reality, because basically what we have is a scientific world. Science is not a cold, demeaning, heartless, spiritless type of concept. Science gives us a little glimpse into reality as far as the way things on this planet operate, as our connections to nature seem to come forward as more people learn about science. In my opinion, this is something that's kind of been lost, and I rediscovered this with Jacques because his entire focus was to think about things that are actually real and not things that are invented by us. So, for example, the monetary system is a big point that I talk about near the end of the film, and I featured Jacques to explain his opinion on this. And first of all, we have to understand that apart from the frauds of the monetary system, apart from the Federal Reserve, money isn't real. Money is something we've created. What's real are actually resources. What's real is energy. What's real is the minerals in the planet, the resources we use to build the technology and the things that make our lives a little bit easier from day to day, and that continue to save people, that continue to, pacemakers. Everything that we have is technological, derived from a scientific point of view, which utilizes the planet's resources. And this is essentially the train of thought that he has latched onto in regard to social design, which is something that many people don't really think about. Like, I would have to say that we as a human species pretty much have no idea how to use the planet we live on. We've never stopped to think about our real associations with nature. And as I stated before, I feel there are big caveats to religious approaches. There's this divisionary thing that comes out. We have all of our established systems which attempt to kind of usurp, what's important in life as far as what to think about, what's good, what's bad, what the direct route is. And what you tend to find is the great majority of them are completely false because they fail to recognize that we're connected with nature. And I think the most fundamental philosophical point that the humanity has not addressed is our real connections with nature, and that is what the Venus Project is about. If you research what he has done, and if you, of course, see the film, you'll see that there's an intense amount of focus on thinking about those psychological ramifications of human behavior and how it relates to society. Now, this is a slightly different point, and if you want me to stay on one angle, because it's a very vast topic to get into what his work has detailed, but I want to deviate into this one particular point, and then you can ask me more specific questions. I think this is very important. Is that human behavior is very much related to the conditioning that we are brought into, and I think this is very much lost in our system. For example, in the typical crime element, of people robbing, people doing, various aberrant things, what isn't seen is, well, first of all, the way we treat these people is absolutely inhumane. I mean, we put people in prisons, in concrete cells, and we expect this to reform them out of fear, not understanding or anything, no real recovery here. It's just fear. The fear of going to prison is what keeps people from doing different negative attributes, different negative things towards society, aberrant behavior, things that are in conflict with somebody else's well-being, which is essentially what I refer to as aberrant behavior, which more or less summarizes all of the criminal activity from the Iraq war corruption to, a petty thief. It has to do with manipulating and taking advantage of somebody else for someone else's personal gain. And it's really terrible that we think this way. And I go back to religion a little bit because there's this kind of punishment thing that we have that the Old Testament's really big on, the angry God punishes for certain actions. And I think this is the wrong train of thought, in other words. If we want to figure out why kids steal or why different corrupt behavior emerges, we have to look at where the cause is for that behavior to begin with. And this is a very profound point that no one thinks about this, though, David. I'm surprised when I talk to people that if a serial killer is found, the public tends to react like, well, we just want to rip him apart. They want to see him executed. It's a very horrible viewpoint towards human beings, like this kind of good and evil thing where some people are good and some people are bad. There's no such thing as a good or a bad person. It's all a matter of how they've been culminated in their experience. Granted, genetics has a certain relevance to this. It sets propensities for people's behavior, but it doesn't tell them anything. We gain our direction through what we've been taught. So naturally, if we go back to, say, the elite, this ruling elite, what is their disposition? What are they coming from? They're coming from elite families, usually. They're coming from elite secret societies that they've been conditioned into, such as Bush and Yale. They're coming, and Skull and Bones. They've pushed into elite manifolds where naturally they're going to behave in elite ways.
Well, now, it's a matter of motivation here. I mean, we come back to where these people's heads are at, and I want to, once again, I've mentioned this numerous times on the show, is many years ago I saw a bumper sticker, and it had a cross, it had a Star of David, an Egyptian Ankh, a Buddha, and a dollar sign, and then it asked the question, which one do you worship? And you see, I think that our Western society has made it very clear by their actions that they worship the almighty dollar. Now, by taking away the profit motive or the lust for money and power, but when you take that motive away, a lot of other bad stuff will just dissipate and evaporate.
That's exactly the point. That's precisely the point. I've been challenged on this many times by people, and I think it's easy to see. I'm glad you stated that the way you did. If you don't have a reason to steal, if you're provided with the necessities of life, and we can get more into this because this is where things get spooky for a lot of people, because whenever you talk about a social system that things are provided for you in some sense, everyone immediately thinks socialism or communism. And these are this black and white distinction, which I really, really hope people can get away from. I get lots of emails that really can't break out of that. Everyone kind of says, well, if you're for world unification anyway, then you must be New World Order, or if you're for something that's not capitalistic, you must be communist, or even people that say if you're not Christian, then you must be Satanist. People have these dividing lines that they automatically jump back and forth with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, if you're not a Republican, you must be a Democrat. And
yes,
that's what we talk about on this program. That's called inside the cage thinking. We have to get people to start thinking outside of the cage.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So the idea basically is really a human idea. It's about how do we make an environment, and this is all Jacques worked on for his entire life, that caters to people's needs very, very accurately. How do we design a society where people don't chisel off of each other? Because apart from the fraud of the monetary system that we have, apart from the fact that it creates scarcity, and scarcity, of course, produces corrupt behavior. If you don't have something, if you are, say, in South Central Los Angeles and you're born into a poor neighborhood, you have no access to work, naturally, you're probably going to gravitate towards drugs, just like these massive epidemics have occurred throughout time. You'll be selling drugs. You'll end up doing drugs. You'll have massive problems because of the deprivation and scarcity, as opposed to, say, someone who is cultured in a giving environment, they have opportunity. Naturally, they're going to be a little bit more balanced than someone who is coming from deprivation. And I think that very simple psychological point is what's not addressed in society. Everyone just wants to lock people up rather than look at the root causes. And I think one of the most profound root causes for a great majority of the problems is the monetary system, not only because of its inherent corruption that's based on its policies, that it's relevant to its policies, but by the psychological element of the scarcity and the need to survive. And as long as people have to take advantage of each other by marketing, by selling things, and undercutting somebody else or using cheap materials, we have everything produced in our society by industry has built into it a certain planned obsolescence, either direct or indirect. A car is designed to break down, essentially. I mean, people could debate that, but they're using cheap materials because they have to maintain market share. They'll cut corners and they'll say, well, we'll make this back in industry with a multi-million-dollar automobile service industry. So it's kind of rigged in its own development. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think
it's planned obsolescence. There's more money in the aftermarket as far as car parts is concerned than there is in selling the cars themselves. And this in itself is the flaw in the system. We talked about this many years ago. I would say 15 years ago, I did a show asking the question, what if there was no such thing as money? What if everything was free? And, of course, this sounds crazy and everything, but the situation that we've got right now, I mean, we're talking about survival of the species, if not survival of the planet, because if we continue on this path that we're on right now, we are going to hit a third world war, and this one will be nuclear, and we may contaminate the entire planet, destroy life. I mean, I can be gloom and doom, but that's where we're headed, folks.
No, I agree. No. I mean, everything is inherent. The system's designed without human concern. And I'd say it's lack of design, honestly. I don't think there's any design whatsoever. I think it's kind of a free-for-all. There's, of course, control mechanisms put in place by the power elite that have been around for a long time. But overall, you have everyone out for themselves. It's a self-interest motivated society, and I mean universally. I'm not trying to go after the capitalist system in America. This is what I refer to in the film as monetaryism. As long as you have people competing for labor, you need labor for income and income to get the resources for sustenance to survive, you're going to have a huge amount of manipulation in between all of that. And inherently, it's inhuman. It's not, you're not helping anyone. I mean, and sadly, it's rewarded, which is even more sick to me. Like, we look up at people that have all sorts of wealth when we don't realize that it's inherently corrupt to have immense amounts of wealth. There's no reason for it, for one. I mean, people say, well, if in a society, for example, like Jacques talks about, to deviate back a little bit, the point of his society is that we've reached a new paradigm where, and he's a scientist, he's a brilliant scientist. His angle on technology, his utilization of it, his understanding of it is profound. And what he's explained to me and what I've done my own research on to come to find is that we have an incredible amount of understanding, an outrageous amount of resources, where we could really take care of the entire planet, at least at the most fundamental level. There's no reason anyone should go without food. The fact that, you still have people dying of epidemics in Africa and AIDS and starvation.
It's insanity. It's insanity. There's no reason for this.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, even if you don't believe that there is that kind of abundance to take care of everyone, the fact that we have these massive pockets is pure insanity, because you can easily make a quick assessment of the resources available in our current industry to see that we could easily take care of all of these situations. And then technology could... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, not only that, you just hit it. The new technology. We've got a break coming up in about a minute here. But just in the past year, there was an invention that has just been brought into the fold. There was a guy named Hans Kohler in Germany in 1933. He invented an apparatus he called a magnetromoparata. And this, in essence, is a perpetual motion machine. It creates electricity out of magnets. This thing just creates electricity out of nothing. Now, if you can, and this is doing about 90 volts. Now, if this machine is coupled with a car that runs on air, that was reported in the BBC, it runs on compressed air, and it'll go for like 200 kilometers. It'll go up to 100 kilometers per hour. The thing will run on compressed air. You couple this magnetromoparata, incorporate it with this car that runs on air, you will have a car that will run on nothing forever. And you talk about a threat to the oil companies and the automotive industry. Oh, my gosh.
Absolutely. You know, and well, as I stated in the film, as abundance, efficiency, and sustainability are the enemies of the profit system. So it's very difficult for us to really consider a world without the problems we have today until we start addressing technology and money and start trying to really try to think about the planet in a holistic sense, to really try to balance things out. I think one of the great comments... And that's, hold
on to that thought. And this is Dave Von Kleist and Joyce Riley. Our guest this hour is Peter Joseph. And please run screaming to your computer and check out the website zeitgeistmovie.com. That's zeitgeistmovie.com, and that's spelled Z-E-I-T. You know, it's I before E. Well, it doesn't apply here. Z-E-I-T-G-E-I-S-T. Zeitgeistmovie.com. And Peter, you've put this up for free download, for free viewing, and you're selling these videos like really cheap. How do folks get a copy of this, a hard disk of the DVD of both films?
Oh, you just go to the website that you just announced and go to DVD downloads, or there's some other links on the homepage. I think you can click through underneath the Google videos. Well,
I got to hand it to you. The simple fact that Zeitgeist, especially the new film, that only came out about, a month and a half ago. Yeah. And you put it up there immediately for people to see worldwide. And, a lot of folks wouldn't do that. It's a profit margin. Say, hey, look, it cost me a lot of money to produce this film. How are you funding your effort? I mean, you're giving this stuff away.
I fund my effort with my own work. I still work and do the commercial stuff that I've always done, and I've done pretty well at that. So I'm very good at I don't want to get into talk about editing and filmmaking, but I'm very good at being very cost efficient in the materials I use when I created the film. This film was a lot more expensive than the first film to make, but I've compromised to the point, and I've statistically outlined what it takes for me to make my money back and what have you. And I want people to understand that I'm not trying to make money off of them. There's a lot of people out there that just sell things. They make movies, and they're supposed to be altruistic, and they sell them for ridiculous amounts of money. And I think there's a big contradiction there. And my entire avocation in the new film needs to be supported by my actions. The old Gandhi quote, you have to become the change you want to see. And I really try to follow and guide my life in that manner. So I'm selling it as cheap as I can just because I really believe in the message, and I want people to really think about the points that are addressed in it. It's important to me that society look at this movie, so I'm trying to do whatever I can to get it out there and without the need for profit.
Well, God bless you for doing that, because you are making a huge difference. As a matter of fact, last March, I was down in Australia for some 9/11 conferences, and it just so happened while I was down there, they were having the March 15th worldwide Zeitgeist viewings. I mean, all over the world, ladies and gentlemen, they were saying, okay, on such and such a date, all over the world, they're going to have free screenings of Zeitgeist. And in Sydney, Australia, there were several locations. And this is unprecedented. I mean, I'd never heard of anything like this going on. And I wanted to ask you, Peter, do you see this happening with the new film Addendum?
Yes, absolutely. March 15th will be Zeitgeist Day again. I'm going to try to get people a little more motivated to actually, rather than just show the film, but to address the issues in the film in a collective way. I have a movement that's been inspired by this that I'm trying to get people in line with in regards to the concept of the Venus Project and my general, philosophy in regards to unification, people, breaking away from the biases and traditions they have to really start to realize that we have to start working together, or it's just never gonna happen. We can't, as long as the world has haves and have-nots, we're never safe. No one is safe in a world where there's deprivation. I mean, to give you a very simple example, I'm sorry, we're going to a break.
Yeah, top of the hour break. This is the short break, folks. 1 minute and 10 seconds. We'll be right back. And let's go ahead and open up the lines. I know people are chomping at the bit. Give us a ring, 1-800-259-9231. Our guest is Peter Joseph. The website, zeitgeistmovie.com. What a contribution this man has made to humanity. Very important work. We'll be right back. Fact. Our special guest this hour is a gentleman who has made probably one of the most controversial films that I can think of that's ever been made, and it has indeed gone viral all over the world. Zeitgeist has indeed enthralled and enraged a lot of people, and probably will continue to do so because now his second effort, reinforces the first. The film is called Zeitgeist Addendum, and you can see them online. A free download is available if you go to zeitgeistmovie.com. And I hate to interrupt when the commercial breaks are coming. I mean, they ain't stopping. So we do have callers that are online ready to go with you, but I wanted you to finish up the point that unfortunately I had to interrupt you with. So go ahead, Peter.
Oh, I was just commenting that the new Zeitgeist Day on March 15th, I'm going to have a much broader scope of topics for people to address in their local communities. Essentially, the whole point is to get the world together in a particular train of thought. And it's time someone does this. It's bad enough that we have, hundreds of languages. It's so difficult to get people to communicate. The internet has really brought people together. And if I can, I'm going to have about 20 languages of the new site for the activism site, and I'm going to have many, many more in different ways through computer translations. I'm going to try to do, of course, human translations initially because computer translations aren't very good. But I'm working very hard to try to get a subculture of people in all countries because it's time we start thinking in a collective sense that want to move forward with something new. They see that we have an outdated social design, and that's literally my feeling. It's time we start changing things. I don't personally believe, for example, that anyone on this planet should be paying for any form of energy whatsoever. I mean, I think energy is so abundant. The manipulation that's been going on, Iraq, oil, all this stuff is just unbelievable, and we're always going to have perpetual war until, as I stated in the film, resources of the planet become common heritage to all the world's people. And I know that's very radical for people to think about, but if you break it all down, you see that in order for the world to have any type of harmony, we have to start sharing everything. Yes. And it's going to change human behavior, too. People are going to become more admirable. People are going to not feel as deprived. They're not going to feel as scared of losing their home or losing their job. And there's so many different facets to it.
Well, I tell you, and this is not to say that we need to be communist, because that's not the issue, but the capitalist system it's got nothing to do with that, is right. And I'll tell you what, we do have callers, but I wanted to ask one more question before we get to this break, and we've got about a minute. Now, in the first film, of course, you talked about the ages, okay, the age of Taurus the bull, Aries the ram, Pisces the fish, and now we're about to enter the age of Aquarius. Now, it seems that every time we go through an age, there is some major spiritual, intellectual revelation that happens to humanity. Do you see that we're on the doorstep right now, the beginning stages of a new awakening, a new dawning of consciousness or something?
Well, I certainly hope so. I'm not really a mystic. I think the shifts in the ages have kind of been documented through religion in many ways, and they have had a lot of shifts, but they've been utilized because of the awareness of the shifts. So lots of stories historically have been revolving around these shifts to the effect that humanity itself actually, becomes really altered, at the presentation of these ages. Obviously, Christianity came into being at the age of Pisces. Now we're moving into the age of Aquarius. There's about a 150-year, threshold there, so it's not a set type of thing. But back to the actual point, I really do hope that, and I see it. I think there's an awakening happening now that has really there's a renaissance about to occur, and things are about to get very unstable. And instability is what creates change, and we need to harness instability and uncertainty, and move forward with what we feel is right. And people just need to do what they feel is right. We need to stop being scared. And I think people are waking up to that. The government, power structures. 9/11 has done a really good job of getting people to wake up to something. I think it's worked to our advantage in a lot of ways.
All right, we got to take a quick three. And I guess, Joyce let me handle this. She got the baton in my hand. Our guest this hour has agreed to stay on for a second hour, and I'm so thrilled that he has. Peter Joseph is the creator of Zeitgeist and the all-new film Zeitgeist Addendum. And I want to clarify, for those of you that are calling into the office right now, we are offering a free copy of Zeitgeist. That's the first film. If you place an order here, it helps us to defray the costs of duplication, et cetera, and we will provide it to you at no charge. And, Peter, you've given permission to everybody that gets a copy to make copies. Is that correct?
Well, of course. And anybody can have a public screening if they care to, as long as, I don't see some tour going on with people making a bunch of money. Anybody can show it at any public venue. I have very little restrictions on it. I just, if anyone wants to sell it, that's when, because there's been a lot of people that have abused the first film, and they still sell it for $20, $30 in weird venues and online.
Yeah.
I had to deal with that. I was very insulted by that. It has nothing to do with money. I just think people miss the point of it. I don't like that. So, but yes, absolutely. You can duplicate it. You can show it. Please do.
I came across some folks when I was at one of the conventions there, and they were selling it for $10. And I said, hey, wait a second. The guy that made it is giving it away. How can you possibly justify selling it for $10? And the response was like a Jackie Gleason humming. So anyway, we have a ton of callers. So are you ready to go? A couple other points that you wanted to make before we get to the calls? Or are you ready to roll?
There's tons of points, but we'll roll with it. We'll go with the callers.
Oh, I'm sure we could talk for hours about this.
Right.
I mean, you've opened up 55 gallons of drums filled with worms and left them all over the world. My gosh. All right, so let's go to the phone callers, and I'm going to ask all callers to please be brief, make your question or your comment, and then I'll ask Peter to respond just as quickly because I know this is just going to go like a wildfire. First up is Chris in New Mexico. Chris, welcome to the broadcast. You're on with Peter Joseph. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, David. Thank you for having Joseph on the program. Joseph, I showed this film, the first Zeitgeist, to a friend of mine. He just absorbed it. The second one, we ended up having a long and deep conversation. Thank you. I mean, it really woke him up. Two questions. Number one, who's going to produce the food? I mean, technology is great, but somebody still has to do the work, and they're probably going to want to get paid for it. How do we get beyond that? And then number two, why the Venus Project? We don't live on Venus. We live on Earth.
Okay, Chris. Well, the first point about food is essentially food production will need technical, oversight. But food production is a very, very simple thing to do. Factories produce lots of things. Almost everything is automated to a certain extent at this point on multiple levels of food production. The first thing we have to think about with food production, I'm going to try to make this quick, it's actually a big point, is that we have tons of multiplicity and duplication of things that are not necessary whatsoever. If you think about food in general, lots of things you classify as different forms of food, but it's been modified for market share. We have all sorts of horrible hormone processes in different types of foods, poisons that are used to preserve and maintain market share, to cut corners, to speed production. There's tons of negative attributes. And once that is overcome, first of all, by eliminating, say, a monetary system based on competition, you'll see that food will break down into its most healthy and bare-bones necessities without the need to compete for market share. There's no need to poison the food and to produce food in ways that are completely unhealthy. And that's why we have the FDA. We have to have something, even though the FDA is rigged too. You have to have something to oversee, all the corruption that goes on inherently in the production. But the very simple answer is that machine automation is extremely powerful in this type of production, as it is today, and could be even more so. Horticulture, soilless agriculture, such as hydroponics. You could grow food. You could grow food in massive terrariums in the middle of the desert if you wanted to. You just go straight down to the water table. Possibilities are incredible. So the answer, very simply, is that automation will provide 90%, and technical oversight will just govern, what's happening. And this is, we get into government in this. And this, again, I want to keep these short, but essentially, the human element is reduced dramatically for two reasons. One, you don't have the multiplicity that is necessary to maintain market share. With all these companies trying to compete, so everyone's constantly cutting corners and mass producing, and a lot of food is wasted in this society, which is just depressing. And then two, the advance of technology will be such that the abundance will be so profound and the use of technology will be so effective, and this is easy to denote, that the human element is removed to a certain degree, and oversight isn't necessary because essentially you don't have the need to corrupt the production because you're not competing for market share. I'm sorry, you're going to say something, David?
I was just going to say, and once we somehow raise our consciousness as a species so that lust for money and power is no longer a factor, then there's no need for corruption.
Exactly.
We have to somehow overcome this whole thing. It is the lust for money and power, and this is the plutocratic way of the world right now that's going to have to collapse. It has to fall. It has to fall. Otherwise, we're going to destroy not just humanity, but the entire world. Absolutely. It's madness where we're going right now. So, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for the call. Let's go to Stan in Missouri. Stan, go ahead. You're on the air, please.
Good morning, Dave and Joyce, and your guest. I listened to your guest talking about religion Is your guest aware that on the news last night, a couple of friends mentioned that now Obama is wanting to put a ban on free speech, and plus he's wanting to take God and Jesus out of the equation of religion. And he's going to be making a speech about this, and he's going to have 4,000 police officers guarding him.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think free speech is a way for the establishment to go after people that are essentially what they consider subversive. So these hate crime bills and things like this, they're using this to their advantage. I'm actually not familiar with Obama's elements on religion specifically that you denoted. I haven't had a chance to learn about what he's doing as far as that. I do know that he was an advocation of these particular free speech elements and stuff like that they're trying to push through, which is inherently restricting, you know, the First Amendment, basically. And I do not agree with that whatsoever. No, people shouldn't be restricted in any capacity. And I mean that broadly. The moment you restrict somebody, that all you do is inflame that restriction. This is the flaw of the legal system. You can't expect that. That's not the way to go. So, sir, I would say I'm definitely opposed to anything like that. People should be able to practice and speak whatever they like to. On a different level, you know, I talk about there are certain philosophical alignments that go with nature that basically make certain things irrelevant after a certain point. And, you know, certain traditions and religion and things like that, I fit into those categories. But to answer your question very specifically, this should never occur. Obama should not have any. There should be no
Anybody that's familiar with history knew the same thing happened during the day of Hitler. They made Nazism a state religion.
Yeah, well, yeah,
well, it was a
political structure more than a religion, but I think I know what you're saying. Absolutely.
Well, this is why, you know, this mad dash towards, you know, saying, okay, this religion, my God is bigger than your God type of an argument is what has caused so many wars throughout history. And, you know, and people end up worshiping their church more than worshiping God. And that seems to be, you know, the problem. They've lost sight of the simple fact that God he doesn't care about whether you go to a church or what, just as long as you humble yourself and understand that mankind, we don't have all the answers, and unless we have an open mind, we'll never find the answers. And that's the whole point. Let's go to Joe in Arkansas. Joe, welcome aboard. Thank you for the call, Stan. Joe, you're up and running. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I'd like to make 2 quick points and then ask for Mr. Joseph's comments. Number one, I remember in the 1960s, the futurists and the economists were telling us that machines were going to make automated production so efficient that pretty soon the workday would be cut down to 2 or 3 hours a day, and our biggest problem in the future by the year 2000 would be what are we going to do with all our leisure time? And obviously that hadn't happened. It looks to me like the reason it hadn't happened is because at the same time production has become more efficient with machines and automation and all this kind of stuff. We've had a huge growth of the parasitic sector, the government, interest, banking, and insurance. And so now most of our work seems to go to pay taxes, interest, and insurance, and instead of just working for ourselves like we used to. And now the I Ching, the old Chinese book, seems to sum up everything really well in one sentence. It says, petty crime flourishes in a society whose rulers are themselves criminals. And so what these criminals, so people follow the example of their leaders. And so what these criminals at the top have done, it looks to me like they've set up a system where real productive work is very little rewarded, and various forms of economic parasitism are very heavily rewarded, and that's our whole problem there. Personally, I do not mind at all working for a living. I don't want anything for free, but I would like to see that real productive work more adequately rewarded, and parasitism not so much heavily rewarded. And your comments, Mr. Joseph, please.
I couldn't agree more to everything that you've just said. Your first point on the fact that we work for, you know, there's so much nonsense in the system. Advertising, taxes, insurance, all of these are monetary elements that have been created. I mean, what is, you know, the real core of this is what is the actual contribution to society. One of the biggest industries in America is advertising, which is the most pointless thing imaginable, really. You could be romantic about it and say it's creative and it's an expression of some artists that are in a commercial realm, but nevertheless, what are we producing? Nothing. There's nothing produced. Advertising is just a leech on big corporate America trying to make as much money off of corporate America. And this goes back to my other point. And corporate America is just a leech off of the consumers. Consumers are just a leech off of each other. The whole system does reward this parasitic element, and that's what the system creates at its very fundamental core, which is why I'm in advocation of what I am. You know, you can't have a system of inherent corruption. You can't have people rewarded for getting one up on each other and expected to ever really work in the long run. It's a have and have not mentality. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we are moving into Zeitgeist. You sort of finished off with an interview with Aaron Russo, where he was explaining a conversation he had with his good Rockefeller buddy, and this is where they were heading. They want to chip the entire world, and my musical question is, how is this different than what they did, tattooing numbers on the arms of the Jews before they were marched off and, murdered in many cases? And I don't subscribe to the, I'm not even going to get into the Holocaust denier situation. I'm not going to go there. But anyway, we are talking about all these different issues with Peter Joseph. His new film, Zeitgeist Addendum, available for a free download if you go to zeitgeistmovie.com. And I highly suggest you do. Keep an open mind, folks, because this is revelationary. You were making a point. Unfortunately, I had to interrupt you for the commercial break, but do you want to finish that, or you want to get back into the callers?
I think I made my point. I really agreed with Joe, your last caller, in regards to the fact that the system rewards parasitic behavior, and that's very important. And since we have a second, I wanted to because the first call you had, Chris, asked why it's called the Venus Project, and to simply respond to that, it's called the Venus Project because it's in Venus, Florida. The original name for his concept was called socio-cyberneering, but I just want to get that out of the way. By the way, there's a weird kind of subculture of people out there that are equating really strange things to this in this sort of a defensive posture. I've actually had people email me, and I wonder if the caller had any thought on this when he made this, Chris, the first caller. People have emailed me saying that the Venus Project was associated with the Venus Luciferian star, and there's been a strange subculture of people that are trying to equate, this idea with Satanism. And I bring that up just because it was on my mind, and I thought maybe that's what the caller was addressing. So that's of course ludicrous.
Yeah,
so anyway.
Yeah. Well, there's always an element out there that tries to link people up with something that they perceive. I've gotten that kind of junk with a last name like Von Kleist. People say, "Oh, don't you know he's got to be a Nazi?" This is crazy stuff, know. With a name like Peter Joseph. Oh, Peter Joseph thinks that he's Joseph, he's Jesus' father or something, There's just crazy people out there. Anyway, Renee in North Carolina, thank you for holding dear. You're on the air with our special guest, Peter Joseph. Go for it, babe.
Oh, Dave, thank you so much for having him on the show and allowing him to be able to express his ideas, because I think he is a head above a lot of the other people we hear. This is what I have figured out, and I would like him to expand upon this. We live in a kind of a pecking order pyramid with the ruling elite at the top. They alone cannot control the masses. I believe they use the professional class to control the rest of the masses. Now, how the masses keep their own oppressor in place is this that I've figured out. The people at the bottom aspire to have a better life. If they admitted some of the evil in our professional class, the doctors, the lawyers, and the psychologists, they would be in a moral dilemma that they aspired to something evil. So they block this out of their mind because they want they're working hard to send little Johnny to college so he can be that attorney, okay? And so this is one of the things that holds it in place is the denial, how the people at the bottom lie to themselves because they aspire to have more resources and respect that are afforded those people in the professional class. And the second thing that holds it in place is this professional class is often composed of professions where people are told they have the answers and they need to go to them when they're in trouble. If you have physical pain or a health problem, you go to the doctor. If you go, there are psychological problems, the clergy, et cetera, et cetera. This puts the person in a one-down position. And so
we got about, Renee, I have to interrupt you because we got 30 seconds before the commercial break, so please wrap it up.
Okay, so the thing is, there are these two things that hold this in place, and I'm sure much more articulate than me. I'd like for him to expand on this. Like I say, how we, the masses, are actually, because our desire for more resources in this pyramid pecking order, how we actually are kind of holding our own oppressor in place.
Good.
Okay, good. But anyway, this film is so important, folks. This is really, really big stuff. And it's going to be premiering tonight at the Quad Cinema in New York City, located at 34 West 13th Street, right off of Union Square. So if you get a chance, if you're within striking distance, it'll be showing all this week at the Quad Cinema, and we definitely want to get as many people going to this film as possible, because how this goes at the movie theater is going to determine whether it will go into national release. And
That's
this
right.
needs to go viral, folks.
And you can go to thebeautifultruthmovie.com, thebeautifultruthmovie.com, and find out all the information.
Absolutely. And I will be there tonight along with Howard Strauss to meet and greet all the folks that come out and dealing with Q&A. So please, if you can make it out there, I will be there for the 7 o'clock showing. Howard Strauss will be there for all of the showings all day, starting today at 1 o'clock. Our guest this hour is Peter Joseph, creator of the movie Zeitgeist and the all-new Zeitgeist Addendum, and they're both available for free download if you visit his website, zeitgeistmovie.com. Now, before we went to the break, Renee in North Carolina made some very lucid points. Peter, if you could briefly comment on what she had to say, and then we can get back to these other callers. So go ahead, Peter.
Absolutely. Yeah, she did make some fantastic points, and I think the most important point is that we, the masses, are very much the ones that are holding this structure in place, which is why at the end of Zeitgeist Addendum I advocate a series of boycott schemes, because the only way things are really going to change is if the consciousness and awareness of the population change first, and then a rejection of the system occurs after. You've got to remember the power elite only has so much control, really. I mean, what are the tools of the power elite? Essentially, it's first brainwashing, because, you know, what did Bush say when he goes up? You know, apart from the weapons, the false weapons of mass destruction, what were the other things that he said? We're going into Iraq for freedom and democracy. Now, those are the most empty. Yeah, those are the most empty terms. It's no different than, for example, saying we're going to go into some Latin American country because the leader is communist, when in fact it's actually a corporatocracy project. So they use these things, and unfortunately the public isn't conscious enough to see the falsity of these notions, so they keep playing the same games over and over again. So once this awakening comes to fruition, once people realize, I say that I personally believe that no one in any country should ever join the military, ever. Why? Because the moment you're willing to make that commitment is the options arise. The reason that the military continues the Cold War, I think we're about to go into another Cold War with Russia, if I'm reading the news right, which is terrifying, with the Polish missile shields and the things like that are happening. Russia stepped right up. And this is just a repeat of the same nonsense that's been going on for ages and ages and ages. If you have weapons, other people are going to feel threatened. And now I know it's a chicken and egg type thing. Like, how do we deal with that in a transitional phase? But I can say I'd have the answer to that. Obviously, resource management and all the things I talk about with the Venus Project are very important. But I'm sorry for this tangent, but the point is that the power system is definitely maintained by us. And until we change our behavior and change our awareness and wake up to all the frauds, and not only that, but also learn how to move in a positive direction, which I think was another point that Renee stated. Now, it's not enough just to expose, 9/11 and say, okay, these are all frauds. We have to have a real direction, and that's why I think understanding nature, understanding, scientific processes, understanding the resources we have, realizing that, for example, realizing the artificialities and realizing what's real is the most important and conscious awakening thing that people can do. Of course, that's a very vast topic, but it really comes down to our orientation with nature, our understanding of each other, and really harnessing new information, keeping ourselves emergent, understanding the symbiotic relationship of life. And this will guide us on a very direct and near empirical path. It's not that it's truth in the sense of a static thing. It's where we find an alignment. Like, we know with certain things we shouldn't do. Like, they used to feed Christians to lions in ancient Rome. Well, we don't do that today. We're slowly maturing as a species. So, and it's time we put the accelerator pad on this and start to realize the social structures that are paralyzing us, and stop participating in them. That's why I say if you live in the Midwest or somewhere where you have access to alcohol as fuel and things like this, where you can get other alternative energies happening. The many cars can be easily modified. Older cars, old Toyotas, modified to run on alcohol. Yeah, there's that
Water for Gas website out there that shows people how to make their own hydrogen generators and supplement their fuel by burning water. I mean, people are getting like 25, 30, 40% increase on their mileage by simply using mason jars, stainless steel wire, and water with baking soda in it. And you see, this is why I applaud the work that you're doing. Like you mentioned at the end of your film, you talk about boycotts. This is the only way to effect a change, because the only language that these madmen understand is the profit margin. You hit them where they live, hit them in their pockets, and that's the only way you can do it. Let's get back to the phone lines, because we got a full boat here and time is a-wasting. Chris in Florida, I give you 30 seconds. Go quickly.
Well, lions are so messy, but the consequences of dropping a bomb is much more instant. And I agree, we need to boycott, as mentioned, the factory farms, and that would send the message that we need to go into more local agriculture. Now, without capitalism, we would not be able to vote with our dollar or any other currency, and it's hard enough to vote with our Federal Reserve note when it's being devalued along with all the other major currencies. The banks just intentionally, in unison, lowered their interest rates for the first time ever to devalue their currencies more quickly and hide that fact because you can't compare the major currencies against each other. Now, Peter, you and I were not born into capitalism. We were born into a state of national emergency that was begun under FDR's banking emergency of 1933 and renewed by every president since then under various pretexts. Congress
please, Chris, we don't need a history lesson. We need to get you your point or your question. So go ahead quickly, please.
Well, now, we need to indict the Fed, the Treasury, the Bush administration, just to be held up as an example of what happens to tyrants who commit genocide, which includes mass slavery as well as mass murder. The Treasury is part of the Federal Reserve under the Independent Treasury Act of 1922. Now, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to entice us to sell out each other at a faster pace than ever and cause this depression by inflating the currency, then shrinking the credit, lowering the interest rates to entice us to sell out each other. And capitalism is often confused with fractional reserve banking because it demands more productivity.
Chris, do you have a question? I don't mean to be rude, but we've got to move quickly. So can you please wrap up your statement or pose your question, because we have to move. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, this contractor, the Federal Reserve, if we would compare them to a military contractor like Halliburton, that needs an excuse to increase its profits, and say Halliburton, after poisoning our soldiers, wanted to impose a draft on Americans, we wouldn't allow that. The raw materials that the Fed and its member banks needs is an excuse to increase foreclosures and inflate the currency and credit. So would we allow the Halliburton to do that, or we're allowing the Federal Reserve to do the same thing?
Okay, thank you for the call. Your comment, I think he's nailing it on the head. Chris is a very, very well-informed listener. Long-winded, albeit, but your comment on what he had to say there, Peter.
Well, it was many different points, definitely. I would first say that yes. Let me address communism. Let me address capitalism to the effect that the capitalist system has been altered very dramatically by the lobbies of the banking institution is extremely true. But we also have to remember, and this also addresses his other point about holding these people accountable through criminal activity through criminal processes such as the courts, putting them in prison. And what I want to say about this is that these are patchwork elements. And while they are necessary at this point in time, while it is necessary to hold the banking system accountable for all of its frauds, while it is necessary to shut down certain attributes that are obviously parasitic, such as the fractional reserve system, I think you could have monetary reforms in the system which would ease the pain quite a bit. But it's still patchwork in my mind because and as long as we have this system based on differential advantage and competition, these types of elements are going to keep happening. This aberrant criminal behavior on multiple facets, I believe, is the consequence of what I call monetaryism at its core. I don't see a difference with the corporations using the military to invade Iraq and, say, some person who's starving on the street mugging somebody to get food. They are two extremes of the same underlying mechanism, and I think that's one of the most important points. So a lot of the things he just talked about are very surface-oriented in my mind as far as change is concerned, because while it is important to expose them, while it is important to hold them accountable in our current legal system, we can't be satisfied with that. We have to start looking at the reasons why all of these corrupt institutions are doing this, why people do what they do. Because once you understand that human behavior is culminated, once you understand that we are all walking culminations of our environment more than anything else, and I think this is, genetics is important. People will argue this. Genetics sets the propensity for people in certain degrees, but genetics doesn't tell you how to say, manipulate another businessman for your own personal gain in a business deal. These are ethical things that are given to you that you think are socially right or wrong or whatever the distinction is based on your conditioning. And until we understand this, there's nothing that's really going to change at a fundamental level. We can keep pointing the finger and putting people in prisons, but that doesn't address the root cause, and I think it's a very important point in regards to the monetary system, because the reform is not going to come from, just repealing certain laws in the long run. It's going to come from a total overhaul of the way the system is and the way humans interact with each other. We have to change the way we look at each other. I don't like going to the doctor's office. Go ahead.
We also have to protect the genetic pool here. I don't mean to interrupt here, but if people are easily dumbed down, and genetically, yes, we are being dumbed down. We're being dumbed down by the products that they're being pushed on us 24/7. The nation's IQ is lowering because of the foods we eat, the additives in our in plastics. I mean, we're just now finding out about prions. We're finding about aspartame. We're finding out all this stuff here, and we somehow have to fight this and raise the level of the intellectual awareness and indeed the consciousness of our populace here. Also, it's a losing battle. Let's go to John in Ohio, and I'm going to ask John, yes, you too have a tendency to be long-winded, so please make your point, get you to your question, and move. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that there's one position that is never heard on anything, whether it's CNN, Fox, NPR, anything that has to do, and I belong to no organization, that has to do with a Marxist or a socialist point of view. Even on the alternate stations like GCN, we have distortions, falsehoods, and lies about what socialism really is. If people want to find out what it's about, they should look to the first primary source, a source such as WSWS.org or other socialist organizations that are taboo, that have absolutely no access even to the alternative media, which bashes that. Now, what I'm talking about is, I think you have got an awful lot of good ideas, but I think that you're obscuring the fact that we live in a class-divided society, whether you want to call it the plutocrats, the New World Order. It is international, and the exploitation of mental and manual labor in this country and internationally in every country by monopoly capitalism is really the source of war, waste, imperialism. Marx himself said the attitudes of any society are those attitudes transmitted by the ruling class of that society. So the government is not some abstraction. It is controlled by those Wall Street military-industrial industrial interest, and as a result, we have to face the fact that we have to eliminate a system which is not an aberration of a free market, which has really never really existed. What we have now, monopoly international capitalism, is the inevitable result of the smaller shark, the bigger sharks, eating up the smaller sharks, the inevitable competition and elimination of capitalism. And so I think that until people begin to look at that class exploitation where workers are paid a tiny fraction of what they produce, leading to these depressions because they can't buy back what they produce, all of this is inherent in that class struggle over the source of all profit, which comes from mental and manual labor.
Well, you're right. You're hitting the nail on the head here, because what we are looking at is the Orwellian concept from Animal Farm. All pigs are created equal, but some pigs are more equal than others. And it's this class thing that divides us all that is, the crux, one of the cruxes of the problem. Your comment, Peter Joseph. Thank you for the call, John.
Yeah, I think, John, that was a terrific series of points. I would say that the class system is inherent in this structure for many reasons, many that you point out. But just the very fact of the financial orientation of, say, the interest system as a very simple example, you're guaranteed a stratification of class in this system based on the fact that the lower classes are always in debt, and this is statistically proven. They're always having to pay interest on their loans. And then on the upper class, you have people that can have, say, $1 million, and they put it into a CD at 5% interest, and they can make $50,000 a year for doing absolutely nothing just because they have the money.
And that's craziness. And that's insanity. Hey, we've got our final break. We got a couple more callers. Are you ready to roll, Peter?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to John in Virginia. And again, I can't stress this, folks. We're in the last segment. We've only got a couple minutes, like 3 minutes left. So, John, go as quickly as you can. Go.
And, Peter, I just want to up front tell you I couldn't disagree with you more. God tells us that man is inherently evil. And if you don't believe that, we sat back during the Clinton administration while he's having sex in the Oval Office and we re-elect him. We sat back during the Bush administration while he was lying to us about an Iraq war and with 9/11, and we re-elect him. We have sat back and accepted a Marxist in office now. So I think the premise is that all people are good, and if we all just had everything, we could just get along is flawed. I went to Europe when communism was still alive and well, and everybody's basic needs were met. The food was met. The health care was met. And what you didn't have over there was any type of happiness at all. It was a depressed environment. And as long as people are greed-driven, and they are, and there's nothing you can do about it, the people who seem to have the most money and the most wealth and the most everything else seem to be almost the most greedy. And they're certainly not happy.
Well,
so this system is
I have to say, John, I can understand where you're coming from, but I think the overriding agreement here is that greed is the crux of the problem. And as long as we have people that are greedy, yes, that is the evil that you're discussing. Peter, your comment. Thanks for the call, John. You're right. Go ahead, Peter.
Thanks, John. Well, I think I would have to disagree with you a little bit, John, to the effect that I don't think that evil and greed are inherent elements of the human being. I know religion tells this and it can communicate this in certain levels. Certain religions do. And that's one of the reasons I tend to be critical of religion, because it instills this predefined notion of the human being. And the more that we learn, the more we begin to understand sociology and psychology and each other, the more we see that greed is not a natural phenomenon. Greed is instilled in us. Kids are not born with greed. It's like saying kids are born with bigotry or kids are born, with any other type of socially shunned type of behavior. I really believe these are experienced, conditioned culminations, and greed and evil, these are not, evil, first of all, is a loaded word. In Catholicism, for example, I think it's extremely detrimental that you are born with eternal sin. I think that is a horribly cynical picture of the human being. The problem is that human beings have been living within scarcity for generations after generations, and we've been forced for our survival. Just like if you look to the animal kingdom, you have all sorts of violence. There's a harmony there, but they live within scarcity. They're not provided. They can't walk into a grocery store, say, a Fox, and get what they need. They have to fight to do what they need to do to survive. And this is, that's the way it is when you live within scarcity. There's a big difference between a human being and everything else. We can create. We can create abundance. We can do things that alleviate the tensions that lead us to aberrant behavior, lead us to greed. And by the way, the idea that just because someone has an abundance means that they're going to be a peaceful person in this system is not the case, because it's a stratification of property that has manipulated people like crazy. Anybody that has, a mansion with 40 rooms has a very serious neuroses problem to deal with.
No kidding. I mean, the solid gold toilet seats and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that is the inherent problem. Hey, Peter, I was just going to say, we're flat out of time here. I wish we could go on for another hour, but, it just doesn't work that way. Peter Joseph, our special guest. The website is zeitgeistmovie.com. Check it out. And, folks, one more time, I'll be at the Quad Cinema tonight, 34 West 13th Street, for the world premiere of The Beautiful Truth. Hopefully we'll see you there.